Other ritual commandments we can make sense of. For example, the commandment to keep the Sabbath. I think we can probably discuss and realize how meaningful and important it is for there to be a Sabbath day, from the nobility all the way down to the workers. A person might say, I don't understand why we have to light candles on the evening of the Sabbath. We can probably explain that light is a natural symbol, and the lighting candles before the Sabbath is an act of sanctification. Why light? Again, I don't think that's too mysterious to a person who understands the idea of natural symbols, for example, light. There are other commandments, when the rabbis looked at them, they really did not understand. The meaning of the commandment was not obvious to them. So the ancient rabbis created a category of commandments that are simply decrees of God that don't have a ta'am, don't have an inner meaning. Some rabbis believe that. And they, without justification in my mind, use the Hebrew word chok, because the word chok can also refer to a civil law, a criminal law, and something moral. But they needed a word. So they took that word, and again, not entirely justifiably, but it's okay, that's the word that they use, to refer to those commandments that are decrees, they're commandments, but we can't find the reasons for them. Now, there were rabbis who objected to the idea that there's a category of commandments that don't have reasons. They said, it's not that they don't have reasons, it's we don't understand the reason yet. One group said, God actually intentionally gives commandments for no reason, just so that you'll obey. That is objectionable to me, but many Orthodox Jews believe it. We do it because it's a decree from God, and we don't have to understand it. It sounds like a parent. Just do it. You don't have to understand it. I'm in charge. So I don't like that kind of parenting, and I don't like that idea of God. Others say, for example, Maimonides would say that all commandments, the so-called ones we don't understand, are either there to shape us ethically. For example, the rules about eating, that you can eat this, you can't eat that. He says it's basically to help us not be gluttons. That if you already have in your mind that you see something, no matter how hungry you are, if you see pork or you see a cheeseburger, you just can't eat it. That helps a person say, there are just things I can't eat. And that would help a person not become gluttonous and not suffer the ill health ramifications of being severely overweight. This is right, Maimonides. Remember, he was also a physician. He said other commandments are there to help us not engage in the practices of the Canaanites. So sometimes when you don't understand a commandment, for example, not to cut the side locks, according to some biblical historians, one of the hairstyles of the Canaanites, what we would call the bowl cut. You put a bowl over someone's head and cut everything underneath. I had a version of that when I was in the military, and it was part of Canaanite culture to have the bowl cut, or the high and tight military haircut. And they didn't want Israelites to adopt the fashion of the Canaanites. So Maimonides says, sometimes if you don't understand something, you have to understand the cultural context. And I want to focus on that. Sometimes when you don't understand something in the Bible, it's because we haven't studied the cultural context of the commandment, and maybe we can't even recover the cultural context of the commandment. It doesn't mean it didn't have meaning in their time. It might just not have meaning in our time. I'll give you one example, the idea of mixing the fields. Many people don't understand why you can't have two different crops in the same field, and many laws of mixtures. Here's where symbolic anthropology really helped, especially the world of Mary Douglas. Mary Douglas is essential reading for anybody who really wants to understand religion, especially her book, Nature and Symbols, which means the meaning of nature isn't contained in nature. Human beings use nature and use nature symbolically to express their own religious, spiritual, cultural concerns. Now, what she says in the book, if I'm not mistaken, that societies under pressure oftentimes create categories of purity against mixture. It seems it's a social, psychological expression of anxiety from pressure on the outside. When pressure on the outside goes down, people relax. When pressure on the outside goes up, some people become more strict. So she would say, if you look at all the laws against mixtures in the Bible, she says, hypothetically, It's a society under stress. Now, what does that mean for all of you? Here's three things I'll recommend. When you're studying the Bible and you get confused about something that you don't know the reason for, if it doesn't affect your life in a direct way, don't worry about it. Study it later. Of course, we want it to be meaningful. Not everything will be meaningful. And if it doesn't affect how you love, you say, I'm just going to put a pin in that, and I'll look up Mary Douglas and I'll look up biblical commentaries and see if I can find some wisdom about the mixtures. The second thing I want to say, if it's something that's meaningful for you, but you an area that's meaningful to you, but you object to it. For example, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, burning for a burning. People understand exactly what that means, but they say it's reprehensible. I know one person wrote, a society that lives by eye for an eye is going to end up with a lot of blind people. I agree with that, and the idea that if for some reason a person loses an eye, for some reason that you go out and pluck the other person's eye out, it has a kind of vengeance, justice feel to it, but I don't think we want to live like that. What the rabbis do, the rabbis also didn't like it. So they said eye for an eye means if someone blinds someone in one eye, the person pays compensation. So the rabbis already dealt with it. So if you say, I don't like an eye for an eye, well, the rabbis of the Talmud didn't like eye for an eye. And they created, again, the civil law of compensation. So in the Jewish tradition, I would say in the Christian tradition as well, this is based on our text, when you look at something that seems to be morally objectionable in the Bible, it's probably already been noticed, number one. And number two, the question is, are there people who actually operate that way? So there's what I call the revered canon, meaning I revere it because it's in the Torah, but is it operational in my life? So there are things that I'll look up later, things that I might object to, especially the ethical, moral side, and I have to figure out what the rabbis of the Talmud did and say, and in our days, just like the rabbis of the Talmud objected to things, we object to things. And then the question is, how much does this set of revered text actually operate in my life? And that's where we have to use our light of reason, our moral intuitions, our moral sensibilities, because remember, from my perspective and perspective of many rabbis, we're in conversation with our tradition. The tradition guides us, but sometimes we have to correct the tradition. Now, this might be an anathema to an Orthodox rabbi, but the rabbis of the Talmud do it as well. So always remember, reverence doesn't mean obedience. You can revere the tradition, but not obey some parts of it because it violates your own sense of reason and your own sense of morality. So if we don't understand something, there's a lot of work for us to do. Maybe we do understand, we just don't like it, and it's not right for us. So in the non-Orthodox tradition, we have that freedom to make the tradition meaningful, a tradition that if we revere it, I think is transformative, but we also never douse our lights of reason and morality. Okay, so that's my few minutes of Torah today on the idea of ta'amei hamitzvot, the reasons for the commandments. I want to go to my major topic for today. I actually, in my Wisdom Works classes, when we would do the wisdom work on what I call the insight, substitution, transformation, I would oftentimes deal with, in every class, the problem of the broken heart. So let me share that with you. When we get to the section, and this is more of an intermediate class, the practice of being able to ascend into the higher self, to look down onto the unconscious ego self that we can make conscious, and we see different emotions and feelings and so forth, some positive, love, reverence, care, empathy, and some negative. And some of the negative ones are anger, resentment, guilt, shame, and unproductive grief. Grief is natural, and I would say is a good ego state because it helps us deal with loss, the inevitable losses in life. So there's what I call good grief because it helps us work through. But then there's also what might call stuck grief, where you're so stuck inside of grief that people's lives actually fall apart. Now, I want to say at the outset, when a person says, I understand, Rabbi Finley, what you mean that I can manage my ego states, and it's very difficult work to transform the way your inner life operates. Our inner lives are profoundly habitual. No matter what you think you want to feel, emote, think, say, and do. I mean, we have visions of we could be different. Your unconscious ego self has a life of its own. And the destructive dimensions of the unconscious ego self that I call the Yetzer Hara, it's very strong, stronger than we are sometimes. We have the will to feel better, to emote better, to speak in more refined ways, to think in more refined ways. That's part of our conscious sense of self. But the unconscious ego self is oftentimes stronger than our conscious self, which means it acts against our conscious will because it has a will of its own. So of all the many things that we struggle with in the unconscious ego self, the one I want to talk about today is what I'm going to call, and again, I don't want to be judgmental about this, but I'm going to call it unproductive grief because I have a theory of the human being. My theory as a human being that we all suffer loss in life. There's no life without loss. And even if everything's going well, eventually you're going to lose your life. So I hope we all age gracefully and die how we want to die. But there will be a process where we have to let go of everything, and that's in the best of conditions. In other conditions, people suffer sudden infirmity. People, of course, in the natural course of things, lose their parents. Sometimes they lose beloved spouses and family members. Sometimes it's horrific to consider people lose children. And I want to expand this, and I hope you don't mind. I know people have grieved very deeply for a pet, and I don't want to minimize that. Many people who live alone, they love their pet, maybe more than some people love their children, and certainly maybe more than some children love their parents. And so when a person says, oh, that's just a dog, that's a horrible thing to a person because the grief isn't measured by the loss. The grief is measured by the feelings. So one person might lose a pet and say, it's an animal, I'll get another animal. If you said that to another person, well, just get a new dog. They want to punch your lights out. It's a horrible thing to say to a grieving person. I'll speak openly. Our family knows this. We grieved when we became empty nesters. When our second daughter moved out. On one hand, we could walk around the house and do anything we want. We don't have the watchful eyes of our daughters looking at. On the other hand, wow, these little people that we've been attached to our whole lives have suddenly grown up and moved out, and we felt a little bit bereft. I remember a synagogue member contacted me, and this was a very distinguished psychologist, said to me, Rabbi Finley, we don't talk about the grief of becoming an empty nester. It's a shock to the system that someone you love, you talk to every day, you interact with, mostly positive, sometimes negative, but they're there. And suddenly they're gone. Now, we know they haven't died, but they are gone. And talking on the phone and WhatsApp is not the same as being in person. And the person said to me, I feel I've lost somebody. I'm grieving, but we don't have a ritual for that. You don't have someone, your child move out, and then you sit Shiva for a week, and people don't come and visit you and give you meals. So in addition to what we call the losses that our culture understands, which is death, illness, etc., there are other losses that aren't as profoundly discussed in our culture. One of them is the loss of a dear pet. I'm going to say for some people, the loss of a job, the loss of a house, financial reversals. And a few cases I've dealt with is the loss of a boyfriend or a girlfriend, which not quite a spouse, is not quite the loss of divorce. It hadn't got to that point. But I've counseled people who are utterly devastated when someone breaks up with them. So I want to start there for a couple of minutes. And I've had this in several cases. It came up several times in my classes where a person was vulnerable enough to say to the room, I'm really grieving. My boyfriend, girlfriend broke up with me. I don't understand it. It's not right. They won't talk to me. I think they're very unreasonable. And I can't get over it. All I do is think about my boyfriend, girlfriend, to the point that I feel like I'm psychologically and even physically sick. And what an incredible, vulnerable thing to say in a classroom of people. So my response was, don't minimize it because you're saying boyfriend, girlfriend. Because there might be a person who's married and the marriage falls apart and they're both done and they were married. You might be in a relationship that you counted on to have companionship the rest of your life. You were deeply in love, and suddenly, from your perspective, out of nowhere, it ended. So I offered this person to contact me privately, and here's a few elements that I saw in this kind of grief. There's the grief of loss, which makes us brokenhearted, but if we add to that that it is not fair, it is not just, which means we're not only left with a broken heart of loss, we're left with a broken heart of having been dealt with unfairly. Now, I want to take unfairly to a deep level. When you're not treated fairly by people who are supposed to love you, it goes way beyond unfair. It feels like you're not seen as a human being. That with love comes regard. With regard comes care for feelings. And when a person says, I don't love you anymore, when you've counted on the love, or when you're in a loving relationship and you're treated unfairly and disrespectfully, it really undoes one's sense of self. Someone wrote, it can feel like betrayal. Now, one could say in a marriage, because of the nature of marriage, it probably officially is betrayal. But when you, in this culturally lighter example of people who are not married, and a person says, I'm leaving, the person said to me, I felt betrayed. My response was, I get the feeling, and my question is, do you want to feel better? Now, that's an essential question. What you don't do is say, it'll get better. Because some things don't get better. You don't say, it just takes time. Because some scars of loss are permanent. So whatever you're going to do, if someone else is suffering loss, don't give advice and don't tell them that time will heal it, and don't tell them it's time to get over it, because you don't know their time. You don't know their timing. You don't know their inner life. And so when people would say, you'll get over it, it'll be okay. I had people say that to me a few times, like, oh, Rabbi Finley, it's going to be okay. And one time I actually said, how do you know? Maybe you're saying to make yourself feel better because you don't want to take on the weight of my grief. So if you want to dismiss my grief by saying it'll get better, that's good for you. But I don't know if it's going to get better. Okay? And I have to deal with the possibility that it might not get better. So what does a true witness to grief say? They don't say it'll get better. They don't say time heals all wounds. They don't say these, what we call bromides, which means advice that amount to nothing. A true witness to another person's suffering hears them out. And it's the same, I think, with a brokenhearted person. Sometimes you need people who are just going to listen and let you express your grief and not solve your life for you. Many times when we talk to others, we don't want to be solved. We want to be listened to. We want to have our stories told. I also want to say that in the brokenhearted state, you might see some ideal. I think this, not seriously, but lightly. If you're grieving, don't talk to a Buddhist. Now, what I mean is, sometimes Buddhists walk around with a great sense of non-attachment and not deeply affected and think with a heart of compassion. And they've been a practicing Buddhist. Once they have a life reversal, they're already set up for a life of non-attachment. And they can disattach and wish the other person well and move through it. But if you talk to a person like that, the implication sometimes will be, and you should be non-attached. And you should let go. And you should wish the person the best. And maybe that's true, but maybe it's not true. In fact, one of my favorite books to read is Meetings with the Archangel, when a non-attached, completely devoted Buddhist, San Francisco Jew, the Archangel Michael lands in his backyard. And And his entire Buddhist philosophy is completely destroyed because an angel from the Hebrew Bible landed in his backyard. It's a wonderful book. And in part of the book, it features his wife, who's not a Buddhist, and lightly makes fun of him. And not only does she lightly make fun of him, his Buddhist teacher makes fun of him. He says, you're taking this all too seriously. So he preaches to his wife, we have to learn to be non-attached. And she says, you are way too attached to non-attachment. Right? So the book is filled with little comments like that. And one reason I like the book is because it takes something of the cultural icon of the non-attached person for whom, it doesn't affect their core self or their higher self. They see everything from a philosophic distance. And there are other people who feel, then you don't feel deeply. Then you're always guarded against deep feelings. So I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying if that is your life and it works for you, helps you get through life, good for you. But don't preach it to somebody else. Don't tell other people that they should live lives of non-attachment. In fact, one of the core values in Hasidic thought is dveikut, which means attachment. So dveikut means attachment to the divine, attachment to values, love, justice, truth, beauty, the good, etc., and deep attachment to other people. When you're attached to other people, that's the way you express love. And when they're attached to you, that's one way that love happens. It's deeply gratifying in loving relationships. And when someone stops loving you, or you lose your object of love, you don't suddenly revert back to non-attachment if you were truly attached. So my words here are for those of us who are attached, who, when something like that happens, it's grievous. And for someone to say, it'll get better, people say, I don't know if I'm going to get better. So let's say you're in a state where you are so devastated by a loss that you're not sure if time heals wounds. You're not sure if it will get better. You're not even, don't think it's possible to get better. So I would say to such a person, no one can judge the severity of your loss. No one can say with certainty, things will get better, time will heal, or you ought to get over it. We don't know. We don't know what people ought to get over. That's a powerful should statement. So if you're in that case, I don't think I would say to you, you ought to get better, you ought to heal, because then I'm imposing my world onto theirs. And if I say, do you need an empathetic witness? Do you want to tell me about it? And I'm not going to give you any advice or give you any adages or proverbs. And sometimes I say, I really appreciate that. Don't try to solve me. Just listen to me. Now, I will then bring my value system. And this is what I ask people. I said, I really hear it. You're utterly brokenhearted. You don't think you're ever going to get over this. You don't even want to get over it. And by the way, one reason people don't want to get over it is that if they get over it, it means the wound wasn't that severe in the first place. A wound from which you recover takes the status of a non-existential wound. So some people feel that if they get over it, it's as if they're devaluing the loss. The loss actually wasn't permanent. It didn't scar you forever. And so if one were to say to a person, well, if you grieve forever because of the severity of the loss, you're not fully re-engaging with life. A person might say, I don't want to get better. The loss was so severe that I want to stay in the loss. I respect that. I don't think it's right. If you were to ask me just straight up, I don't think it's right. But I respect it. I will say to a person, may I offer a word of advice? Remember, I always ask permission. Sure. I do think that suffering devastating loss is part of life, and recovering from devastating loss is part of life. Healing doesn't mean that there's no scar that is left, but part of, and this is very much fueled by my Kabbalistic theology, is that as we heal ourselves, we're healing the divine. So it's not as if the divine actually ordains that we heal, but when we suffer from a Kabbalistic perspective, God suffers. And as we heal, God heals. We also may owe it to other people. People immersed in grief, oftentimes there are people around them that they themselves are grieving that someone's not getting over it. Now, I counsel families, don't say things like, it's just a dog, it's just a boyfriend. Don't ever minimize anyone's grief. Don't ever say, time to get over it, time to move on. Witness their grief and ask one question. Do you want to heal from this? Would you like to see your life at some time in the future where the hurt is not so total and you can see you're functioning better? Although the grief never goes away, the wound leaves a scar. It's not your identity. So remember, reversal, psychic injury can topple our identity completely. The question is there a post-trauma identity? Is there a post-wound identity, theoretically? So a person says to me, yes, I believe theoretically there's a post-traumatic identity that I can achieve. I just don't know how. Now, I believe there is. And I don't want to force it on anybody. But when a person says, yes, I believe in a post-traumatic identity, after this injury has toppled my identity, I don't know how to do it. So I want to offer a few steps. The first step is one truly has to take a philosophic perspective. The philosophic perspective is, I'm not alone in this. No one comes into life with an exemption from suffering and sometimes deep, grievous injuries. They're within our imagination. We just don't like to think about it. No one has an exemption. You might live in a part of the world where it's happening to everybody. You might be singled out. As you go about your way, there are people that you will encounter who are suffering from deep psychic injuries that we don't want to imagine. They're out there. They got up, they got dressed, they brushed their teeth, they went to work, they're walking down the sidewalk. They don't wear the black ribbon to show that they're in mourning. You wouldn't know they're in mourning unless you took the time to listen. By the way, I had a moment like this when I went to get bones for my dog. I was at Vaughn's and I went down to the butcher and I got leftover bones. And the person says, for your dog. And I said, yeah, with a big smile. She says, you love your dog? I said, I really love my dog. She says, and cried. The cashier, my dog just died. I'm grieving terribly. I said, I really get it. Love is love. And my heart goes out to you. She said, thank you, and moved on. So I could say that. I think all of you could as well. And I didn't say, it's just a dog. I didn't say, and that, she said to me, some people say to me, get another dog. I said, that's a horrible thing to say with your beloved dog. So people are going through life. People are suffering. And I think from a philosophic perspective, we have to say, I'm one of many. I don't have an exemption. I did not come into the world with an exemption card that says it shouldn't happen to me. That's the first thing, philosophically. And then a little more psychologically, other people do heal. Maybe I can't heal, but I know factually that other people do heal. So if you, first of all, say to yourself, I'm not singled out. It is the existential human condition. Remember the stretch from joy to tragedy. It's a part of human life. And again, I don't mean that this should heal you. It's just knowledge to have. I'm one of those where the wicked hand of fate has dealt me a blow that is almost impossible to bear, although I know other people bear it, and I know I'm not alone, and I know other people find a way to heal. Those two theoretical ideas, I'm not alone, and other people heal, therefore, how do I heal? Now, I want to take a third step beyond the philosophic step, psychological step, and that is the spiritual step. I believe it is true. If you cultivate a spiritual identity that is deeper than the vagaries of life, I'm going to say even deeper than the love you feel for other people. And why? Because when you develop a deep spiritual identity, it is from that place that you love other people. This is an important note. Sometimes when people love other people, they bring into that love that the love should make them feel better, that other people are here to serve our needs, that in the unspoken codicil of love is, what have you done for me lately? Why don't you make me feel better? Why do you make me feel bad? If you love me, I'm supposed to feel better. And if I don't feel better, it means you don't love me. That's a setup for disaster in relationships. And some relationships are just rolling disasters, partly because people think other people owe them to make them feel better. Well, they don't. We have to make ourselves feel better first. So if I love, I want to come from a place where I'm responsible for the quality of my own inner life. Of course, I love it when other people love me so much that I feel joyous. But ultimately, I'm responsible for my inner life. And therefore, I want to love from that place and not love from the place of we're here to make each other feel better, but we're two people responsible for our own inner lives. And from there, we want to accompany each other on this journey called life. And as I've said many times, minimally, we don't want to make a hard life harder, and therefore be invested in your own spiritual health. Now, I think people who are continuously invested in their own spiritual health already have a wisdom about the human condition, a wisdom about the psychological process that people can go through, and they may wake up every day and say, this is fragile. I could lose everything today. I could lose my health today. I could lose someone that I love today. My life may have a sudden reversal today. But I am I. I'm an authentic human being who can suffer. And whatever the suffering is, my question is, what do I do next? Now, people have told me that that's a horrible way to live. That to be prepared for grief, according to some people, for example, people who believe in Course of Miracles, if you think it, you're going to draw it toward you. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it's true. So I'll operate on what I think. When I think of preparing myself for suffering, I don't think I'm drawing it to myself. I believe I'm actually preparing myself for things that are not likely, but might happen, that are not inevitable, but possible. So when I prepare myself for these things, when there's a reversal, there's some part of me that I can call on. Now, I don't want to be dour. I don't want to be grim. But I can share one thing with you. I've tried to live this way for a long time. And I remember when I had a heart attack in 2006, I was, as you can imagine, very shaken by it. And the cardiologist I went to, who knew me as a rabbi, he says, Rabbi Finley, this probably affects your sense of invincibility. So I knew right away I needed to get another doctor. But I said, I've never felt invincible. He said, don't like rabbis and clergy. I said, not me. I said, whatever the opposite of invincible is, like vincible, I don't know. But I live with a great sense of the fragility of my life. And so I remember when I had the heart attack, I thought, well, if I'm on my way out, it's a surprise. I thought I had more time to become a better person. That was my thought. And I remember thinking to myself, if I survived this heart attack, more years to become a better person, better husband, better father, better everything. I don't want it to wrap up now. I'm not done. And I had surgery and I had another many years until my triple bypass, which again, I had in February 2023. And I went into that and, they said it's 99% success rate. And I said, well, have you had 99 surgeries so far? Because am I the one, am I the next one? Who knows? So, it was a tough time. My wife and children, I said, 99 survival is good and also possible. So we said provisional goodbyes before I went under. And I remember thinking to myself, I've done a lot of good since my heart attack in 2006, and I want more life. But there's a part of me that says, no one is guaranteed. No one's guaranteed life. And I went into it with a sense of hope, but also equanimity. Now, sudden loss. Now, I had time to prepare for that. I had time to prepare for the surgery. I've had people where a breakup, the loss of a job, things that seem too mundane for a conversation on brokenheartedness, but they are utterly brokenhearted. And as I've counseled them, one thing I ask them is, and I'm not trying to be preachy about it, do you have a spiritual practice? Are you in touch with your soul? And do you have a sense of the divine? People sometimes say, well, if people believe in God, they don't feel as strongly because God's going to make it better. I said, well, as a Kabbalist, that's not my thought. God doesn't make it better. We make it better. But I think a relationship with God for me means, among many things, this. I have a deep connection with my soul. And my soul is a part of my wisdom. And my wisdom understands the processes of life, including loss, grief, and healing. That's part of my soul knowledge. If you haven't trained your soul to be wise about the human condition, to be wise about loss and grief and healing, it does take you by surprise. You're not prepared whatsoever for what happens next. So my approach when I am counseling a grieving person is to give them that knowledge. I believe that knowledge, the soul knowledge of the human condition, that includes devastating grief and loss, a life gone wrong, being unjustly treated, to being unfairly treated by people who should have loved you better. When you love someone, but they stop loving you, these are devastating things in my mind, but this devastation is lessened if a person has spiritual soul wisdom. It's not that it's not devastating, but you know about life. You know about loss. You know about grief. You know about healing. So oftentimes when I'm counseling somebody, I don't try to counsel them the grief. I don't say, you're going to find love. It'll get better. What I say is, we have to go deeper than the grief. Deeper than the grief, which means the life of the soul. And here's the last thing I want to say when I talk about the life of the soul. For me, it's fascinating but true that the soul has a life of its own. And though time does not heal all wounds, I believe the soul can go a long way in healing wounds to some extent, and the soul operates in time. So sometimes I can be really grieving something. I try to grieve with the wisdom of the soul, and I do this thing that might sound curious to you. I hand it over to my soul. I don't hand it over to God. I hand it over to my soul, because I believe my soul is a source of wisdom and strength and courage. I hand it over to my soul, and then in a wakeful moment, I check in with my soul. I said, how's it going? And the soul says, still working. Thank you. So living in conscious connection with my soul is a very deep part of my identity, of my own identity. And I've had times which were really grievous, and I stay in contact with my soul, and I talk about my grief to my soul. My soul is wise. My soul is courageous. My soul has resilience. My soul's connected to God. And then one day I wake up and I say, I actually feel a little bit better. Thank you, soul. So while I'm living up in my conscious life, my soul is doing its work deep in the unconscious. And then one day I wake up and the soul says, you're better. And I wake up and I actually physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally feel better. Now, I can't go back to sleep, which means if I don't continuously nourish my soul with conscious reflection and meditation, I don't bring the strength to the soul. The soul is, as it were, captured in a being that doesn't care about the soul. In fact, that's a very deep Hasidic idea. Our souls are stranded in us until we care for our souls. It's an interesting idea. The soul can care for us if we care for our souls. Now, the idea of care for soul, I can't complete that idea today, but I just want to tell you, the idea of care for the soul exists, And I really want to teach this. Maybe I'll do it on Shavuot. I'll have maybe a couple of hours to fully extend the idea. So here's my advice to the brokenhearted. Take a philosophical perspective. I'm not alone. Take a psychological perspective. Other people get through this. If you want to, take my spiritual perspective. The soul knows how to get us through it if we care for the soul. And if you have not been caring for your soul, the way through devastating brokenheartedness is to start to care for your soul. Give your soul the tools that can heal you. Now, I can say that I've had some success as a counselor. Now, remember, all I'm doing is giving tools to care for the soul. The other person has to do the work. I remember talking to a person that said, I'm lying on the floor in an embryo position in utter misery. I'm crying. I'm in pain. I don't know what to do. I don't want to take drugs. I don't want to drink. I don't want to smoke pot. I know that's not really going to help me in the long run. I don't know what to do. And so my first thought was, stand up, clean up, walk, and if you can, don't rehearse the grief. Don't rehearse the injury. Don't rehearse the unfairness, but rather talk to your soul. You can even say, like we have in the Psalms, Barchi nafshi, O my soul, bless this moment. O my soul, give me wisdom. If you believe in God, say God. I refer to the soul because I think one of the places that I connect to God is in the soul. It feels for me more honest. Because if I say God, it's like I'm assigning it to an external force that's going to do all the work for me. When I turn to my soul, I realize that I have to work with my soul in order for my soul to help me. So I said, I want you to give this a try. Walk. Don't rehearse the wound. Talk to your soul. And that, I found, just those two pieces of advice is the beginning of healing. First, don't rehearse the wound. Take responsibility for your contents of consciousness. The more you think about it, the more you're going to feel pain. The more you rehearse the wound, the worse you're going to get. If you can simply suspend that thought, go deep into your soul, communicate with your soul, what you'll end up being able to do is rehearse the wound from the perspective of the soul. I suffered a devastating loss along with many other people. I suffered a devastating loss. Other people seem to find a way through. I suffered a loss. I think my soul is deeper than the loss. So you don't rehearse it just by rehearsing the wound. You nurse the wound with the help of the soul. All right, those are all my comments for today. It's such a deep topic that I will go ahead and take a few questions. So if you ask a brief question, I'll try to give a brief answer. Shanti, yes. We're going to try to unmute Shanti, please.
Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
So you were just saying, say a certain psalm or prayer.
Oh.
My soul bless. What is that?
This is from Psalm 104, where it says, Barchi nafshi ed Adonai, Adonai Elohai gadal tameo. This is Psalm 104, if I'm not mistaken. But it's like this. Oh, my soul, bless God. Barchi nafshi et Adonai. Let my soul bless God. Up here, I'm stuck. I'm going to turn my thinking over to my soul. And when you turn your thinking over to your soul, I think one of the first things your soul says is, God is immense. Now, your soul might not say that, but it's an interesting little meditation on creating consciousness connected with God. This is the beginning of Psalm 104, if you're interested. And it's, by the way, it's in the meditation before putting on the talit. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, oh my soul, bless God. Adonai Elohai gadal tameo. Oh God, you are immense. Hod v'hadar lavashta. You adorn yourself with beauty and majesty. Oteh or kasalma. Adorning yourself with light as a garment. Noteh shamayim kiyiriyah. spreading out the heavens like a canvas. And the beauty of this meditation is light is the garment of God. I try to say this every day. It's in Psalm 104. Oh God.
What version you said to your soul? You said you changed the word a little.
Oh, I did. I'm just using the phrase, oh my soul, bless God, and then I made it my own meditation. But I've taken it from Psalm 104, which is a meditation on divine light, and I say, oh my soul, bless God, and then I refer to this moment. But when you say, Barchi nafshi et Adonai, notice what you're doing. As if to say, I can't bless God because I am too distraught, but my soul can. So the soul has an authentic life of its own. That's the greatest thing I learned from those two words of that psalm. You say, Barchi nafshi et Adonai. Why would you say, oh my soul, bless God? Because my ego consciousness can't bless God because it's too wrapped up in my ego. But when I say, oh my soul, bless God, it's as if I'm putting my conscious self on pause and letting my soul do the talking. So just that idea, you can put your conscious self on pause and let your soul do the talking. That's the only point I was trying to make. I quoted that psalm because that psalm is the source of my idea that we can put ego consciousness on pause and let the soul do the talking. I hope that's a good enough answer.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. And then Rena, please.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, I can hear you.
So when I saw your title for this week, I said, oh, I have a broken heart that's not from a human relationship area. It's about the situation in Israel and Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
My heart is so broken that I cannot connect hardly with anything that's joyful, even though I try. And I'm trying to think about what you're saying, how to talk to the soul. And I'm talking to my soul, and my soul is crying. I had a thing this morning when between sleep and being awake, I had this image of myself sitting around a table with the three souls of the murdered.
Yeah. The victims.
The victims who were found this week. It made me jump out of bed, and I still cannot connect with reality.
Thank
How
you.
do I,
Sure.
how do I heal this break?
Thank you. So the question is, for example, those of us who are mourning, tied to the Jewish people, tied to the state of Israel, the images are impossible to forget. I think this is a permanent wound. What happened is impossible to metabolize. There's no philosophic system that can account for it. Even if one says, this happens all the time, it's different when it's personal. But at least philosophically, we know that these atrocities are everywhere, as we speak today. So at least I know we're not alone. Secondly, I know there are people whose loved ones have gone through these, who are murdered through atrocities, who have taken their tattered lives and sewn our garment from it. Now, let's say we'll go to this situation of those of us grieving. I don't know if I can get over it. Meaning, I don't know if I can go to a party and be at the party without the grieving those souls and their souls being with me. I like you. I try to commune with them. I mean, I look at the pictures and I try to be in their presence. I want to say, I will never forget you. In fact, I want to say that one thing I want to do when we go to Israel is grieve every single person somehow. Look at their picture, go to the street where they lived, and I want to say, you're in my soul. I'm carrying you. So if their souls are suffering, and I think they are, when we say, I've taken you into my soul, I will never forget you. I want to bring healing to your soul. I want to bring healing to your families. So I haven't talked about this, but I have a secret mission. Secret because I don't want to sound too grandiose. If I can do anything to help one family, I will. If I can help two families, I will, because I have to. And May Rob and I spoke about this. Certainly we're there because our children live there and all kinds of reasons. But I knew when I was there and I worked on a moshav a few miles from Kibbutz Be'eri and I could see it in the distance, I thought to myself, I have to be with them somehow. So, Rena, when you say I had them around the table with me and I'm saying to them, I carry you in my soul, I will never forget you, I think you're healing their souls. And you're giving your own soul work to do.
And what about the children in Gaza and their mothers who are so devastated?
Yeah, I agree. So now when we take, let's say, our personal suffering of what happened on October 7th, and then we say a war began very tragically by an enemy who weaponizes its civilians. And I grieve. I don't have the personal connection. I have the people who died on October 7th. But I grieve what's happening in this war. But to tell you the truth, I grieve in Sudan. 15,000 people were murdered in the past year, if I'm not mistaken. So once you start grieving, the problem is there's no end to it. One reason I had to stop teaching the Holocaust class at USC is because it was unbearable. Every single semester, I took people from the origins of anti-Semitism into the camps. By week 15, I was inconsolable for 10 years. I had to stop teaching. Now, I've shared this, I'll share with you. Every time and this is a pretty grim thought. I don't want to start crying. Every time at services, when the children would come down the aisle, an unconscious thought comes up. They would have killed you too. I look at the community, lovely people with radiant faces. An unconscious thought comes up. They would have killed you too. What do I do with that? Well, I can avoid, or I can say the best thing I can do is bring some joy to my life in spite of those who want to murder us. Meaning I'm not going to give them a posthumous victory. They're not going to snuff out the meaning of my life. They're not going to snuff out, the mission of the Jewish state. They could hurt us, and they did hurt us. But we're not going to fold our tent and just crawl away in grief. We're going to reassert ourselves. We're going to be strong and resilient while our souls are hurting. Okay? Anyway, I've gone way over time, so I will have to get other people's questions later. Please put them in the chat. I will read them and respond to them, I promise, next week. But I do want to keep our...
I'll continue your response if that's okay.
Oh, please do, Abigail. There you are on the ground, and this is your generation, sweetie, and we've talked a lot about it, so please go ahead.
So I actually have a friend who's been going in and out of reserve duty. He's here with me in school. He's now visiting his family